The sky above the alien capital was not like the skies of Earth. It was not blue and soft, but instead a deep swirling mix of violet and silver with strange shapes moving slowly like silent watchers high above the shining towers that reached into the clouds. The buildings stood taller than mountains, covered in glowing symbols and strange metal that hummed with quiet energy. The people who walked those shining halls were not human. They were the Zellari, a race known across the galaxy as conquerors. Rulers, masters of hundreds of star systems, feared for their power, respected for their ordering. The center of this grand city stood the Hall of the Sovereign, an ancient place made of black crystal and living stone. Its walls whispered with echoes of old battles and forgotten names. This was the heart of the Empire, and today it beat with excitement and unease. For the first time in history, a human delegation was arriving to speak with the Sovereign, the Queen of the Zellari, the most feared ruler in the galaxy, known not only for her unmatched power, but for her absolute control over everything she ruled. Humans stepped into the hall, unsure eyes watching every detail, while the air vibrated with pressure and heat. There were 5 of them, all dressed in formal suits sent from Earth's diplomatic corps. But one among them looked different. His name was Reed, and he was not a leader, not a soldier, not even a high-level scientist. He was a systems tech, a quiet man who once fixed communication arrays on Mars, and had never stood in any grand hall before. His face was calm, but his eyes held a strange stillness, like a sea that had not moved in years. Zellari nobles lined the sides of the hall, tall figures in silver armor with eyes like molten gold. They watched the humans with cold interest. Some whispered in their native tongue, their voices like wind over broken glass, wondering why this fragile species had been allowed to walk these sacred grounds, wondering why such a weak race was now standing in the presence of greatness. The music stopped. The hall went silent. A door at the far end opened, and the Sovereign entered. She did not walk like others. She glided as if the air itself carried her. Her robe shimmered with colors that shifted like water on fire. Her crown rose like living flame, and her eyes pierced every soul. They looked upon those who met her gaze, usually fell to their knees, some in fear, some in awe, some because they could not breathe in her presence. But as she entered, her gaze passed over the humans without pause until it landed on Reed. And then something changed. She stopped, her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, as if some hidden memory had just broken free. And before anyone could understand what was happening, before even her own guards could react, the most feared being in the galaxy, the queen who had burned worlds and shattered fleets, slowly knelt to the ground before this quiet human. The hall gasped. Even the stone seemed to tremble. The nobles stepped back, their eyes filled with panic and disbelief. The human delegation froze. None of them understood what was happening. Even Reed took a step back, as if unsure whether this was real, whether his eyes had tricked him. The Sovereign kept her head low. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the hall. She spoke in clear standard tongue, and the words hit harder than any weapon could. She said, "Only this, the air has returned." Reed blinked. He looked around, thinking she was talking to someone else, but her eyes remained on him, her body still bent low in a position no one had ever seen her take. Her guards looked frozen, unsure if they should pull her away or follow her lead. Some dropped to their knees as well, though their eyes showed they did not understand. One of the human diplomats whispered, asking Reed if he knew her, if there had been any secret contact, any prior mission. Reed shook his head, his voice low, as he said, "No, I've never seen her before. I don't know what's going on." But inside him something was stirring, something old and heavy, like a shadow rising from deep water. His skin was warm, and his heart beat faster, not in fear, but in something else, something older than fear. Zellari priests stepped forward, their long robes scraping the floor as they chanted in their ancient language, their eyes scanning Reed, as if trying to read his soul. Some placed strange crystals in circles around him, others lit blue fire from their hands, and touched the ground. All the while the Sovereign remained bowed. A voice echoed from the back of the hall, old and shaking. It belonged to a Zellari. Elder who had not spoken in years, he pointed a long finger at Reed and said, "This is the sign, the ancient. Code has awakened, the prophecy has begun." Reed wanted to speak, wanted to deny everything. But when he opened his mouth, no words. Came only a strange pressure in his chest, like something inside him was remembering something that had happened a long time ago in another place, maybe in another life. One of the nobles stepped forward demanding answers, saying it was a trick, a game to insult their queen. Others shouted for silence. Others prayed. Some just watched in complete silence, their minds spinning. With fear and awe, the queen finally stood slowly with her eyes still on Reed. She reached out a hand and said, "You do not know who you are, not yet, but the stars do, they remember you, and so do we." Reed did not take her hand, but he did not walk away either. He stood still like a tree in a storm as the hall around him changed from cold to burning, from confused to devoted, from distant to near. That moment, Reed was no longer just a technician from Earth, no longer just another human lost in a galaxy too big to understand. In that moment, he became something more, not by choice, but by destiny, and though he did not yet know what that meant, he felt deep in his bones that everything was about to change, not just for him, but for everyone forever. Chamber had fallen into a strange silence, the kind that does not come from peace, but from too many minds trying to understand what they just witnessed. The sovereign of the Zalari still stood before the human named Reed, her gaze calm and steady. As if the chaos around them no longer mattered, nobles whispered, and guards stood frozen. The humans behind Reed remained wide-eyed and confused. None dared move, none dared speak above a whisper, if they feared breaking whatever force had wrapped itself around this moment. Reed's breath was slow, though his heart felt like it was running a race. His hands were still, his eyes focused on the queen, but his thoughts were spinning through memories that were not his, or perhaps they were. He could not tell anymore. Images were flashing inside his mind, strange visions of places that did not exist, of stars that burned red and blue, of giant machines buried in stone, of tall beings kneeling before a man who looked like him, but not quite like him. It was as if the air itself was pulling pieces of him from somewhere else. The queen finally spoke again, her voice soft like wind through leaves, yet it filled every corner of the hall. "You carry the light of the first," she said, "and no one else in this galaxy does not anymore." We thought that line was broken, but it only slept, and now it wakes in you. Reed opened his mouth, but only a question came out. "What does that mean?" "I'm just a systems tech. I fix machines. I'm nobody important." She stepped forward, not threatening, not proud, but with the grace of someone speaking truth that had waited too long to be said. "You may not know who you are, but your blood does. Your breath does. Your presence calls to things we sealed long ago, things buried in flame and crystal." And Sorozellary elders moved closer, forming a ring around Reed, each holding glowing stones that pulsed with faint golden light. They began to chant old words in a language so ancient, it made the air shimmer with each sound. Reed felt pressure in his chest, as if those words were not new to him, as if they had been spoken to him long ago, and were now coming back from sleep. A human official stepped forward, his voice uneasy, but firm enough. "We demand an explanation. If this is some kind of test or manipulation, we will withdraw our delegation and report to Earth Command." But the queen raised one hand, and the man fell silent, not from fear, but from something deeper, a feeling that told him he was standing before something sacred. The queen turned her eyes to him, then to the humans behind him, and said, "You came seeking peace, but peace cannot be offered until truth is known. Your kind has wandered the stars, thinking yourselves young and small, but the truth is you were never young and never small. You are the root, not the leaf. You are the fire, not the spark." The Zalari were guided long ago by a being from your world, a human who carried the same light that now stirs within Reed. The nobles began to murmur louder, now anger mixing with fear. Some believed the queen had gone mad, others feared that she was right. A few stepped forward, demanding she step down, accusing her of betrayal, of bringing prophecy to life when it should have stayed buried. But she silenced them with a single glance. Reed stepped back from the circle, his voice stronger now, but still unsure. Why me? Why now? I've lived a normal life, no strange powers, no visions, nothing, until today. What changed? The Queen's eyes softened for a moment, as if she too had waited for this question. She spoke of an old war, a time when the stars burned with weapons so powerful they broke time itself. She spoke of a builder, a human who walked among ancient races and brought them hope, a man who vanished without a trace, leaving only fragments of his code within chosen lines, genetic patterns hidden across species, but most clearly in the bloodline of Earth. You are not that man, she said, but you are his echo. And the echo is enough. A memory surfaced in Reed's mind, a time when he was only a child, lying on the roof of his home, looking at the stars, wondering why they felt so close. Now he understood they were never far. They had always been calling, and he had always heard them. Even when he did not know it, one of the priests stepped forward, placing a hand over Reed's chest without touching it. The light around him pulsed for a moment, then a sharp flash filled the room, and when it faded, Reed saw a shape hovering in the air. A symbol glowing golden. It spun slowly, then vanished into his chest. You must undergo the ascension, said the priest without emotion, but with deep reverence. Only then will your truth be complete. Only then will your light be seen in full. Reed frowned. He looked at the Queen and asked, what is the ascension, and what happens if I refuse? The Queen turned her gaze to the great doors. At the edge of the hall beyond them lay the vault, a place no outsider had ever entered, a place where ancient machines tested the worthy. She spoke of the ascension as a path, not a punishment, but also not a choice. If you refuse, she said, the code within you will die, and with it the last hope for what once was and what could be again. Reed stood in silence, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. He looked to the humans behind him, but saw no answers in their eyes, only fear and wonder and confusion. Then he looked at the Queen and felt something he could not explain, something that said she was not lying, that whatever had begun here was real. He stepped forward and said, take me to the vault. The Queen nodded. The doors opened, and the path ahead glowed faintly with blue light. As he walked forward, he felt no fear, only the strange pull of a truth that had been waiting to be found. And behind him the hall was silent again, not from confusion, but from something far older, respect. Sovereign watched him disappear into the corridor, her voice a whisper that only the stars heard. May he return with the fire or not? At all the corridor stretched ahead like a living tunnel, carved not by hands, but by time itself. The walls shimmered with soft blue lines moving like veins under skin. The air was heavy with silence. Not the kind that comforts, but the kind that waits, as if the very stones expected something. Reed walked with slow steps, his thoughts a storm behind his calm eyes. Each footstep echoed across the polished floor, reminding him that he was no longer walking as a visitor, but as someone chosen, even if he did not understand what that truly meant. The path led him deep underground below the palace, and deeper still, beneath the roots of the capital city, until he reached a vast chamber shaped like a hollow star. The ceiling high above looked like the night sky, filled with lights that moved slowly like real stars, breathing in a rhythm only the old could feel. The floor was smooth and cold, with strange shapes drawn across it, glowing as he stepped over them. At the center stood a single pillar made of silver and black stone, twisted together in a way that felt alive. On top of the pillar rested a floating orb filled with swirling golden mist. This is the vault, said the Queen's voice from behind, though she had not followed him. Inside, her words arrived like a wind carried from another world. This is where the trial begins, not of your body, but of yourself. Reed stood before the orb and reached toward it, without knowing why. The moment his fingers touched the golden surface, light burst through the chamber, and the world around him vanished, not with violence, but like a page turning in a book. He was no longer standing in stone halls, but in a wide desert of white sand, stretching forever in all directions above him. No sun, only a pale sky, where stars pulsed like heartbeats. A voice filled the space, not loud, not soft, but endless in depth. And age it spoke not in words, but in feeling and thoughts placed gently into his mind. You carry the breath of the builder, the one who gave form to the first fire. You are the echo, and the test has begun. Shapes rose from the sand, tall and shifting, their forms unclear like smoke given shape. They circled Reed, slowly watching without eyes, and then they began to speak, asking questions, not spoken aloud, but directly into his thoughts, questions that pierced not his knowledge, but his truth. Would you trade a life to save a world? Would you destroy a star to end a war? Would you kneel to your enemy if it would bring peace to your people? Each question struck deep, pulling answers from places Reed did not know existed. His heart answered before his mind could think, each answer not shaped by logic, but by something more ancient inside him, something raw and human. Shapes changed with each answer, sometimes growing brighter, sometimes darker, sometimes still as if considering him. Then sand shook and the shapes vanished, and a new figure appeared, not strange, not alien, but a mirror of himself, taller, older eyes like burning coals. This version of Reed looked at him with sadness and strength. I am what you become if you fail, said the reflection, and he attacked not with weapons, but with fear, doubt, anger, memories twisted into blades, scenes from Reed's life where he had failed, where he had walked away, where he had stayed silent when he should have spoken. Every regret became a wound, every fear a chain, but Reed stood firm, not because he was unafraid, but because he chose not to run anymore. He stepped forward into the storm of himself and reached out to the reflection, not to strike, but to accept. And in that moment, illusion shattered and the sky turned gold, and he was back in the vault, standing before the pillar, breathing hard, his chest rising with deep breaths, not from exhaustion, but from something that had been taken and now returned. The orb floated higher, and light poured from it, forming symbols in the air, spinning faster until they locked into place, forming a map of stars with Earth at the center. Lines connected it to dozens of other worlds, as if drawing threads from a web. And in that moment, Reed understood he was part of something older than he could name, not a hero, not a king, but a flame that had waited long enough to burn again. The Queen entered the vault alone, her steps silent, her eyes steady. She saw the map and bowed her head, then looked at Reed with something close to pride. You have passed, she said, not because you were powerful, but because you remained true. Outside the vault, the nobles waited, the priests, the soldiers, the humans, all standing under the strange sky of the capital world. As the great doors opened and Reed stepped out, the map of stars now floating behind him for all to see, a signal not of war but of awakening. One of the elders stepped forward and dropped to one knee. The others followed one by one. Even the guards lowered their heads, and the Queen herself stood beside Reed, not in front of him, not above him, but beside him as an equal. Reed looked at the faces around him, at the fear turned to wonder, the doubt turned to belief. He did not raise his hand, he did not speak loud, but his presence was enough. The map faded slowly into the air, leaving behind a quiet that no longer waited, but listened. Somewhere far across the stars, something ancient stirred, a signal long lost, now reborn. And far beyond the edge of Zilari space, another race awoke from sleep, their ships turning their eyes, watching the light that had returned. And Reed, standing under the sky of another world, felt it too, not fear, not burden, but purpose. And though he still did not know what lay ahead, he knew one thing without question: he was ready. The stars above the capital world began to shift slowly, as if something behind them had started to move, something ancient, something forgotten. The Zilari watched the sky with quiet unease while Reed stood among them, calm but burning inside with questions that had no names. The memory of the vault still echoed in his bones. The image of Earth surrounded by connected worlds still hovered in his mind. Like a silent fire, he did not understand everything, but he felt that understanding was no longer far from reach. The Queen stood beside him, her voice calm, yet filled with weight. She looked at the sky, and then at Reed, and said, "There is more you must see. The truth does not end in the vault. It begins there. Follow me." And he did not ask where or why. He simply followed her through the high corridors and down the long golden bridge that stretched over the endless sea of clouds. Beneath the royal temple, every step felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the growing pull of something that called to him from deep within the planet itself. They reached a hidden chamber sealed by light and guarded by silence. The door did not open with commands or codes. It opened the moment Reed stepped forward, as if it had always been waiting for him inside. The air was cold and filled with the scent of metal and dust. The walls were covered in symbols that shimmered as they walked past them, glowing faintly like old stars trying to wake from sleep. In the center stood a great sphere larger than any ship Reed had seen. It floated above the ground, spinning slowly and surrounded by a field of gold and silver energy. The Queen stopped at the edge and turned toward him, her eyes softer, now her voice quiet. "This is the memory core left behind by the one we called the Builder. It holds the truth of what came before, of how your kind gave birth to the stars, and how that truth was buried in time." She raised her hand and the sphere responded. A beam of light shot out and formed images in the air, not just pictures, but living memories, entire scenes replaying as if the past had returned. We'd watched a world that was not Earth but looked like it, green-blue, filled with tall cities of light, where humans walked not as explorers, but as guardians. They had built wonders. They had created peace among races. They had led the stars not with power but with wisdom. But something had changed. Something dark had risen from the void, a force not born of life but of hunger, and the humans had fought it not with weapons alone but with sacrifice. The Builder was not a ruler. He was not even a warrior. He was a bridge between minds, a voice that united hundreds of worlds. Through something deeper than politics or war, he had given everything to protect that unity. And in the final battle, he had used his very essence, his core being, to seal the darkness away, and in doing so, he vanished from all worlds. Before he disappeared, he encoded his memory into the fabric of life itself, planting it in the DNA of chosen lines across many races, but strongest in those closest to him, in the people of Earth. And over time the wars ended and peace returned, but memory faded and stories turned to myth. And eventually, even the myths were forgotten. Reed stepped back, eyes wide, breath shallow. As the images faded, the sphere dimmed, and the Queen turned toward him again. "You are not that man. You are not the Builder, but his spark lives in you, and through you the code has awakened. The past has returned." Looked at his hands as if they no longer belonged to a technician from Mars, but to someone else, someone older, someone filled with echoes. He thought of the dreams he had as a child, the way stars seemed to call his name, and now he knew they were not dreams, they were memories buried, waiting. The Queen stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. "Many in my council believe you should be crowned, given command of our fleets, made ruler of the alliance that could rise again, but I do not believe that is your purpose." The Builder did not seek power, he sought unity. He did not lead with fear, he led with light. Reed nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "Then what must I do?" She looked toward the sky, where the stars were no longer calm. "A storm is coming. The same hunger the Builder once sealed is returning. The seal weakens each cycle, and now it cracks again. There is one place that still holds the final key, a planet lost to us long ago, hidden in the shadow of forgotten systems. It is called Viora. It was once the heart of the Builder's work. If we find it, we may find the weapon or wisdom needed to stop what comes." Reed stepped forward, his face steady. "If we don't." Queen looked at him, not with fear, but with truth. "Then the stars will burn, and no one will remember why." Silence fell between them for a long moment. Then a voice called from beyond the chamber, one of the Zalari messengers arrived, breathless, eyes wide. An enemy fleet had entered the outer system, not just any enemy, but the Dravari swarm, the ancient hive that had once been part of the old war, now risen again without warning, without demand. "They have returned," said the Queen softly, her gaze locked with Reed's, "and they come for you." Reed did not step back, he did not panic, his voice steady and clear. "Then we do not run, we prepare." The chamber shifted as alarms rang through the city, and Zalari forces mobilized, but even in the chaos the Queen remained by Reed sighed as he stood not as a warrior, not as a king, but as a human chosen by fate in memory and fire, and as the first shadows of the swarm touched the edge of the system, the stars watched in silence as the old truth awakened, and humanity prepared not to be saved, but to lead once more. The sky above. The Zalari capital turned darker as the enemy fleet drew near. Stars that once seemed distant now pulsed with warning, and the great city prepared for a battle it had hoped would never come. Soldiers moved through the glowing halls, ancient machines. Awakened from sleep, defensive towers rose from the ground like giants of old, and across the city, fear walked. Silently in every breath, Reed stood at the center of it all, not as a warrior trained for war, not as a ruler, born into power, but as a man who had answered a call buried deep within him. The Queen stood beside him, her eyes steady, even as the storm of war gathered above. She led him to the inner sanctum, a hidden place where only one had ever walked before the builder himself. Behind a wall of light, a ship waited, unlike any other, built not by hands, but by memory, shaped from a design encoded within the builder's last breath. The vessel pulsed with a warm golden glow, its surface smooth like flowing water, its engine silent, yet powerful. It responded not to buttons or codes, but to presence and will. It had no name written on its side, for it was not built to carry armies, it was built to carry fire. The Queen turned to Reed, her voice quiet. You are the only one it will accept. It was made for you, not your body, but your echo, your memory, your light. Reed stepped forward. Without hesitation, the ship opened. Like a blooming flower, light wrapping around him as he entered the chamber. Inside was not like any ship he had seen. No controls, no screens, just a wide open space with flowing energy, and a place at the center, where he stood as if the ship itself waited for his breath, and as he exhaled it responded. The floor glowed, the walls shimmered, and the vessel lifted into the sky as if it remembered how to fly through time itself. Outside the swarm had arrived a wall of darkness stretching across the stars. Thousands of ships, each alive with hunger and rage. The Zalari fleet moved to intercept, but they were outnumbered. And the enemy did not wait. The sky exploded with light as battle began. Energy beams cut through space shields. Flared weapons fired and ships shattered. But even as the fight raged, something changed. From the clouds above the capital, Reed's ship emerged, not fast, not loud, but with a presence that made even the swarm hesitate. It did not fire, yet did not speak. But it moved through the chaos like a blade of purpose, and when it reached the center of the enemy formation, it released a pulse. Not of destruction, but of memory. The pulse spread like light, touching every ship and every mind, and in that moment the swarm screamed, not in fear, but in confusion. Memories, not their own, filled their minds, visions of the builder, of unity, of a time before their hunger, of a world they had helped destroy and forgotten. And as their screams echoed through space, the ship opened its true core, revealing a flame, not of fire but of time, a living memory that reached beyond death and silence. The Queen watched from her command center as the enemy fleet began to falter. Their formation broke, their weapons dimmed. Some turned and fled, some froze, and some simply vanished like dust caught in the wind. The light from Reed's ship did not destroy them. It showed them what they had lost, and for many that was enough to end the fight. But not all the swarm had a heart, a single mind buried deep in the largest vessel. A mind that remembered more than the others and refused to bend. It moved toward the capital like a falling star, ignoring the battle, ignoring the fear. And Reed turned his ship to face it alone, not with weapons, but with something older, with memory, with purpose. He flew into the heart of the enemy vessel, not with speed, but with will. And as the two forces met, the sky turned white, not from heat, but from light, and silence followed. The Queen stepped forward, eyes on the sky, as the light faded, and there above the city, the enemy vessel crumbled from within, not torn apart, but turned to dust like a dream, ending slowly. Reed's ship returned, descending gently to the capital, landing on the highest platform where the Queen waited. And when he stepped out, he did not look tired, he did not look broken, he looked whole, as if he had found the missing pieces of himself among the stars. The people gathered, noble soldiers, priests, humans. All watched in silence as he walked toward the queen. She bowed once more, not in submission, but in respect. And he bowed in return, and then turned to the crowd and spoke. His voice was calm and clear. I am not a ruler. I am not a god. I am not the builder. I am only human, but that is enough, because being human means more than blood. It means choice. It means courage. It means the will to remember and to protect. Zalari listened, the humans listened, the stars listened, and from that day forward the galaxy began to change, not through conquest, not through force, but through unity. Reed did not stay in the capital. He did not take a throne. Instead, he helped build the council that would guide the future, where all races could speak and stand together. He helped open the path to Viora, the lost world of the builder, and there they found more than weapons. They found hope. They found knowledge that would light the stars for generations. Queen remained a leader, not as a figure of fear, but as a voice of reason and balance, and in time she became known, not as the most feared ruler, but as the one who stood beside the human. Flamen Reed returned to Earth for a time, not as a hero, but as a man who had walked among stars and remembered what it meant to be small and strong and free, and the galaxy did not forget him. It could not, because everywhere the light of his memory touched a new story, began a story of fire, not for war, but for warmth, and in that story humanity was not alone. It was the bridge, it was the beginning, it was the flame that would never go out, the end.